Welcome to Moving Forward, conversations on culture, identity, healing, and hope. I'm your host, Linda Anderson, and I created this podcast as a space for real, heartfelt conversations with people who are reflecting, evolving, and boldly stepping into what's next. This podcast was born out of my own journey through seasons of loss, transition, and transformation, and my belief that healing happens when we come together to share our stories. My hope is that these conversations will inspire you to pause, reflect, and find courage as you move forward in your own life. Today, I'm honored to be joined by Dr. Anthony Muhammad, one of the most sought-after educational consultants in North America. With nearly 2 decades of experience as a teacher, principal, and award-winning school leader, Dr. Muhammad has helped transform schools into thriving communities of learning. At Levey Middle School, he and his team double student proficiency in just 5 years, making the school a national school of excellence and a model for professional learning communities across the country. Dr. Muhammad is also a best-selling author of Transforming School Culture and The Will to Lead, The Skill to Teach. Books that don't just speak to educators, but to anyone striving to lead with vision and purpose. His work reminds us that moving forward requires us to examine culture, understand identity, not only our own but others, heal from past divisions, and hold on to hope for the future. In our conversation today, Dr. Muhammad shares not only what it takes to transform schools, but also timeless strategies that can help leaders in any field build healthier cultures and stronger communities. So again, I am so honored. I can't stress being honored enough to have Dr. Muhammad on board. Welcome.
Thank you, Linda. I appreciate the invitation, and I look forward to responding to whatever questions or a conversation we choose to engage in. So thank you for all of those who've tuned in. I appreciate it.
So Dr. Muhammad, you served as a teacher, principal, and now a consultant and author.
Mm-hmm.
So looking back, what pivotal experiences shaped your belief in the power of culture to move schools and organizations forward?
Okay. Well, I think that, like any progressive endeavor, as Jim Collins was, you have to have a BHAG, a big, hairy, audacious goal. And my BHAG was to make an influence on people that society had left behind. So when I started as a teacher in 1990, I wanted to work in the roughest middle school that they had to make the biggest difference. And what I noticed was the norms, the values, the belief systems of my classroom were very different than many of the other components of my school. So the transition to administration was to have greater impact, to influence an entire institution on that BHAG, that big, hairy, audacious goal. And I wanted to work in schools that had a profile of kids who needed a lot of support. And that's why I chose to work with students in Metro Detroit at Levey Middle School. I had the pleasure of attending a professional learning community institute and heard Rick DeFore and Bob Baker and Becky DeFore for the first time. And what I found was a structure that, if we engaged in it, could really, really accelerate my big, hairy, audacious goal. So to go back to school and have folks embrace that in the way that I was passionate about it, we were able to accelerate our progress and become a national blue ribbon school. Well, then the opportunity came that I could not only influence a building, but influence districts and states and systems and nations. So my goal has never changed. It's always been to impact those who society has forgotten about. But the transition from teacher to administrator to consultant is just the same objective in a different, broader, more impactful format. And it was through working with schools on implementing PLC that I realized that culture was a big challenge to full implementation. And again, if I could tackle culture, then I could help schools accelerate their focus on helping the underserved.
So you talked about the school, but a lot of I feel what you, and I've read your books and so on, but what are the key leadership practices that did help you create the kind of breakthrough that you did? But I want to really stress too to the listeners, how can or might these practices apply in corporations and other organizations?
Great question. Well, what I've discovered now in almost 20 years of studying school culture is that they don't typically improve organically or on their own because people are creatures of habit. So if we have a habit of being late, we continue to be late. It's usually not like a prompt fairy that shows up. If we're accustomed to defaming students and parents, that typically doesn't improve on its own. Leadership is the catalyst to accelerating and improving culture. And we found when it comes to leadership, there are four critical qualities that leaders need. And Dr. Luis Cruz and I wrote about that in a book called Time for Change. Four critical leadership disruptive behaviors. Number one is effective and clear communication. We call communication a meeting of the minds. Leaders who are poor communicators fail to engage people intellectually because, Linda, you could have a great vision, but if you don't clearly communicate the rationale, the logic, the intellectual reason behind why you're asking me to change, then you don't have a thought partner. But people who are really clear communicators are able to garner and to develop a cohort of people who will engage because it just makes sense. So we call communication the ability to answer the question, why? So if I want you to change your assessment practices, why? If I want you to change your discipline procedures, why? And if I can answer that question, now I have a thought partner. The second is more emotional, and that's the ability to build trust. So why is really intellectual. I'll do it because you made it make sense. But some people, that's not enough. If I don't trust you, you can cite all the data, all the research, give me all the exemplars in the world, but my issue is emotional. It's not intellectual. So the ability to build trust is really a component of emotional intelligence. And I have to be very honest with you, that's something I've struggled with my entire life and really as a leader my entire career. And I was fortunate to have an assistant principal who was supremely gifted in that. She was the person that could make a connection of the heart. She was a person that could show empathy, that would listen, that would show compassion. I'm a data, a numbers, a practice, and a get it done person. She was the yin to my yang. The third is building capacity. So trust is about, I trust you. So communication is, I know why I need to do it, and I trust you. But some people hesitate to engage. They just don't know how to do what you're asking them to do. Here's a very frequent example. We work at a lot of schools who structurally change their school to implement an intervention period. RTI is pretty much, if you don't know what RTI MTSS is in 2025, you're somewhere in the Stone Ages. Mm-hmm. And most schools plan for it. But a question I like to ask leaders, have you trained your teachers or given them the tools to know how to do a quality intervention? Mm-hmm. We tell teachers, make your lessons more engaging. Have we taught them how to make their lessons more engaging? So the question of how is about capacity. I know it's a good idea. I trust you, but I don't know how to make my assessments more rigorous. I don't know how to analyze assessment data. We may be making assumptions and being like bewildered about why teachers are not engaged. It could be a pure capacity issue. So the third critical skill is being intentional in building capacity. What we've learned is that people know why something is necessary. They trust the people asking them to engage, and they know how to do it, that most will engage. That most resistance to change is directly linked to a lack of effectiveness of leadership in those three areas. And the fourth critical skill is that if you've done all of that and you've met all of the critical needs that people have, the fourth is the willingness to be unpopular and hold people accountable. Because if we've addressed all your critical needs and you just say, I'm just not interested, or I'm just not going to do it, that's not enough. At some point, somebody on your team has to be willing to say, at this point, I'm not asking you, I'm demanding. And you either comply or I'll use my authority to make your disengagement very unpleasant until you either surrender because everybody else is engaged or you figure out that this just isn't the place for me. So the combination of those four skills is what Dr. Cruz and I have found creates the right cocktail for moving a culture forward.
Mm. So you just gave me a lot to think about, even though I'm, have retired from being a principal. You're going to run into walls, I guess I'll say
Mm-hmm.
it for myself. And you can't always be that popular person, right?
Mm-hmm.
Is what I'm hearing. So on that note, though, and I'm even talking from my own experience, but in the book, Transforming School Culture, you write about overcoming staff division. And that's, to me, I've experienced that. What
Mm-hmm.
are the most common sources of division? But the other thing that I really, and I'm looking forward to hearing about, is how can leaders begin to heal those divides to build stronger teams?
Okay. Well, those four skills are really the blueprint.
Yeah.
I ask leaders to think about teachers like teachers think about students. And when a student is not performing, we always ask the teacher, what might you change in your practice? That might help that student be more engaged, improve their comprehension. So when the staff is divided, it's typically because they've been subjected to a toxic culture and ineffective leadership. So we let leaders know if you improve your communication, if you become more emotionally intelligent, if you provide more direct support in areas teachers need support, and you toe the line on things that are really, really critical, you can't skip your team meeting. You don't get an option on that. You can't say, I'm not doing an assessment. You don't have that choice. It's the combination of those cocktails. But there are a few prerequisites that I address in chapter 2 of Transforming School Culture. I call them addressing the elephants in the room. And there are three elephants that start the conversation on healing division and moving forward. I call them predeterminations. The first one I call perceptual. And perceptual predetermination is having the courage to address counterproductive stereotypes, particularly around students, that hinder engagement in better practice. And those could be stereotypes about race or social class or gender or disability or home language. If people carry hidden counterproductive ideologies, those have to be brought to the surface and addressed in a professional manner. The second, we call intrinsic predetermination. That's addressing students who may walk around with self-loathing or self-destructive perceptions about themselves. So if we ask educators or leaders to have empathy for educators when they have damaging stereotypes about students, then we have to have empathy for students who have damaging stereotypes about themselves. Kids who are disengaged in self-destruction were programmed that way. The same way I'm asking people to have empathy. If I grow up in a household where bigotry is normal, I was shaped that way. So if I'm a principal, I have to handle you with a level of empathy to help walk you out of that. Well, if a child was taught to be self-destructive or self-loathing, a book I'd recommend to educators who are struggling with students with that profile is a book called The Pedagogy of Confidence by Dr. Yvette Jackson. Her theory is confidence is not nature, it's nurture. It can be nurtured. So the same way we can nurture educators out of their damaging stereotypes, we can also do it for students. And the third, I call institutional predetermination. And those are counterproductive, damaging policies and systems and structures that are antithetical to what our objectives are. They could be assessment policies. I don't accept any late work. I don't allow retakes. Kicking kids out of school for minor violations instead of moving towards restorative practices. It could be issues around attendance and tardiness. So I ask people to consider what Deming said years ago, that you can't have a system that's productive that is irrational. A rational organization, your policies, your systems, and your practices are aligned with your goals and objectives. So what I ask leaders to do with their teachers is to sit down with your mission statement and pull out all your policy and procedure books and go through them policy by policy with a question. Does this policy support our purpose, or does this policy hinder our purpose? Not giving kids another opportunity to demonstrate mastery directly contradicts the work of Lazat and Edmonds with effective schools. That's one of the 7 correlates of effective schools: multiple opportunities to demonstrate mastery. So we've built in strategies and structures and policies that are antithetical to what we say our purpose is. Those are critical, just toxins in our environment that can be easily addressed as a prerequisite to the more difficult work, which is changing human behavior.
So I'm going to stop. What you just said, change in human behavior.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm going to the listeners, everything you're saying, I'm bringing my own mindset into the corporate world also, the
Mm-hmm.
private sector. Every
Mm-hmm.
single thing you're saying, change in human behavior, I can go back to other things you said, applies everywhere, whether it is at schools or in the private sector and in our world right now, definitely. So on that note, and you talked a little bit about this, about identity, you speak a lot about the importance of understanding not only our own identity, but the identity of others.
Mm-hmm.
But how can that awareness help leaders build inclusive environments where people feel valued and also seen?
Well, they have to recognize that inclusivity is a part of their objective. And because of the influence of populism, which runs its course, leaders are losing, I've witnessed, a lot of their moral compass. So often our purposes can be encapsulated in our so-called mission statement. And I've seen very few mission statements that aren't inclusive. We want all students to reach their potential. Well, when you have community members who aren't interested in all, and they influence board members who are elected officials, who then put pressure on superintendents who are supposed to be professionals, and then that trickles down to the principal and the student and the teachers, then we hear things like terms like equity being outlawed or inclusivity. There's certain states you can't say inclusive. So this becomes a challenge to leaders. Is what I'm being asked to do aligned with my moral and my professional compass? And we just haven't had those crucial conversations. Where leaders step around those conversations, they look like scared middle managers who don't want to ruffle feathers. And I'd never encourage people to do anything that might make them lose their employment. But that's not what I'm into. But from my moral compass, I would not engage in work that I can't be proud of. So if I can't acknowledge children who may be LGBTQ because it's not politically popular, then am I now acting in a contradictory fashion to what I say my mission is? If I start excluding certain truths of history because there's a handful of community members and a populist sentiment that the board has now surrendered and capitulated to, and now the superintendent becomes a sycophant to that agenda, now that changes my professional practice. You always have the ultimate choice, how you spend your time and your talent. And I just couldn't go before my staff and be duplicitous. To say I care about all, but then be an agent of policies that marginalize some, then I'll feel like a hypocrite. So either I work with my board, my superintendent, to get clarity or to address those community members. Or honestly, Linda, I just have to find somewhere else to work. But I just can't be caught in this hypocritical back and forth of losing my soul over money.
The back and forth, the losing the soul. There's so many reforms that are out there, but failed reforms that have happened. And because of that, schools and organizations carry these wounds with them. How do I get past this? How do I get past the inequities? How do I get past the failed reforms or even the divisions among staff? So, what steps can leaders in any place take to help heal their teams and rebuild trust? That's my key ending right there.
Okay.
Build trust.
Well, one of the things that I've discovered, and it was been written about significantly, is a book by Cuban and Tyack called Tinkering Towards Utopia. And it's an analysis of the cyclical nature of reform in American schools. And one of the things that they write about, and they discovered I agree with, is that we go to scale too quickly. Any entrepreneur or professional who's engaged in experimentation, they do beta testing, they do pilots. So we swung from whole language to science of reading. And we're going to swing right back once that's over. And teachers are used to this change at scale that hasn't been well thought out, that hasn't been beta tested for our environment. So I know this sounds kind of like low-hanging fruit. Start with a pilot. Engage teachers in intellectual discourse and experimentation. So if we're trying to improve student behavior, maybe the third grade team who's really, really vested in Cantor's progressive discipline, they try it for a semester. And the fourth grade team who really likes restorative practices, they do it for a semester. And let's come back and share our experiences, share the impact, share the data. But when we say, well, the district says we have to do PBIS, well, the district says we have to go to this, it stimulates that cynicism that another failed, overly ambitious reform that hasn't been vetted, that hasn't been tested, that hasn't been tweaked for our purpose. School should be labs of experimentation because there's tons of research, but all research isn't applicable in every environment. So let's vet it, let's analyze it, let's try it. Well, let's try it for looking at almost like a scientist in a lab. I have a hypothesis. Let's see if it works. And if it does, now we have evidence that the rest of the staff can embrace and say, look, hey, that progressive discipline stuff is really hitting the mark. Look at the conduct of the third graders compared to the rest of the school. Now we start to bring it along. When we do too much at scale without considering all the nuances and all the variables that differ from school to school and district to district, we go from one promise to another and then fall flat on our face. And then teachers get more and more cynical every time we bring a new one. And I don't blame them.
And as I'm listening, I'm thinking a lot about conversations and critical conversations, courageous conversations. But a lot of times these conversations about equity can be uncomfortable. I've experienced it quite a bit sometimes. And they're uncomfortable, but how do you encourage leaders, not only in education, but again, also in corporations, to lean into those difficult conversations in ways that they can create the healing instead of more division?
Well, I'd ask the question, why is it difficult? Should a person be more comfortable in bigotry and exclusion? If you work in a public system and you're supposed to serve the public, then why would I be uncomfortable with having discussions about ways to be better at what we're commissioned to do? A person should be more uncomfortable to be divisive or exclude people. If we have Hmong students or Spanish-speaking students or students of multiple races, and we say we're here to serve all, I'm moving forward with a level of confidence that you have the same mission that I am. That's not uncomfortable for me. I'd want to make you uncomfortable for validating why you want to exclude, why you'd want to. So, nah, I think it'd only be uncomfortable if, as a leader, I'm not sure about what I'm commissioned to do. And if a person says that that's tough, all I've asked them to do is get on the phone and call all the parents of the kids that you're not courageous enough to support.
Mm.
Call all the parents of kids with IEPs. Call all the English learner parents. Say, you know what? I know our mission says all, but some of our staff, they expect me to tiptoe around some of their narrow mindedness, and it's uncomfortable. So your child won't be served well this year because we just don't have the courage to address it. It's not that challenging. If you want more kids to learn more and more often, then let's meet the needs of the kids who are not learning. Now, I'm not here to change the world. So if we don't have kids in our school who are um, transgender, then I don't need to broach that topic because that does. But if we get a kid that is transgender, then we have to address it because that kid's a part of the all. So instead of trying to be a social maverick, be a better professional
Mm.
and focus on how do we serve the students we have.
Mm.
And if a student's mental health because of their sexual orientation interferes with their ability to embrace algebra, what do we do about it? If a kid's lack of resources because of poverty interferes with their focus in algebra, what do we do about it? If a child's lack of seeing their identity being honored because they're African American in mathematics, what do we do about that to help them engage better in algebra? We're making this harder than it has to be because we've all kind of been bullied into making bigotry normalized. I can't change society, but I certainly can assume that the 50 some odd people that are supposed to be partners in a professional endeavor, that we serve the kids that we are commissioned to serve. I can do that.
Right. And you said you can't change society and that we can't.
Mhm.
However, you've been through a lot of this.
Mhm.
You've been in this profession and now consulting in your own business. You've obviously moved forward in many
Mhm.
reforms, and that does require hope. What
Mhm.
gives you hope about the future, though, of education and also leadership today?
People like you
Oh, thank you.
and individual teachers. I don't have honestly much confidence in systems, larger systems anymore.
Mm.
So it's more of a localized level of hope. There are certain districts and states that I've just withdrawn my time and attention because I just can't sign on to their requirements or their agenda. But there are plenty of people that want to serve all kids whose big, hairy, audacious goal is the same as mine. We have over 90,000 American public schools. They're not all like some of the others. There are quite a few who, like you, want to see the walls of division torn down, who want to be more inclusive. That's where I focus my attention. And I don't waste 1 ounce of energy or miss any sleep if in 2025 you're still judging people by skin color, by national origin, by how much money they have in the bank, where they live, then shame on you. And
Mhm.
I'm not wasting any of life is short. I'm not wasting any of my time on your ignorance. Shame on you.
Mhm.
And hope you and all the people that think like you are happy. But I choose to withdraw. And you just won't be a part of my circle. That's how I maintain hope. And I stay busy because there's enough schools with people with hearts like yours and your listeners who want to move forward. And nah, my mom taught me very young, don't force yourself into places where you're not wanted.
Mhm. I shared with Dr. Muhammad in the beginning when him and I first were talking before we became live that I was married to an African American and have three biracial children. And I appreciate everything you're saying because how dare you? And
Mhm.
I appreciate that statement because we do need to move forward with hope,
Mhm.
but we can't if we're going to stay stuck here. And that goes to everything and included very much so with students.
Mhm.
We want to move them forward. How can we if we're
Mhm.
staying stuck?
Okay.
So on that note, though, to a new leader, because that's the hard part. There's so
Mhm.
many new leaders coming into this
Mhm.
profession, whether it's a principal or also a manager that's leading a fractured team. What advice would you give them if they
Okay.
who want to inspire hope and possibility?
Okay. Well, one, be very, very discriminating and pragmatic about where you choose to lead. There are over 90,000 American public schools. Be very um, discerning because there are kids everywhere. So we call sometimes in PLC something self-inflicted wounds, like a fifth grade team that chooses to departmentalize and say they can't collaborate. That's a self-inflicted wound. You can have those teachers teach two preps, two teach math science, two teach ELA social studies, and team. That's a self-inflicted wound. So if you choose a place whose core values are completely different than yours, that's a self-inflicted wound. So number one, pick a place where you feel like your core values are aligned. Now going back to teams and focus from a professional standpoint, you want to build a student-centered culture. So all improvement is adults willing to reflect on their practice, analyze their norms, their habits, and behaviors with a question. Does this advance our cause to help kids learn more, or doesn't it? If you can get your staff to that point to be self-reflective, examine, is um, m- making most of my um, lessons all direct instruction? Are kids advancing, or do I need them with more cooperative activity? Is being constantly late to our team meeting, is that advancing our team, or is it not? William Glasser has something called choice theory. And in choice theory, which is a psychological philosophy, he asks people, is your behavior moving you closer to your objective or further away? And if a leader can get a team or group of people to do that, now you have allies in continuous improvement. The way forward to greatness isn't mysterious. It just requires a commitment to emulate what greatness does and do it consistently. They're great schools. What are they doing? What can we emulate? And let's continue to do that.
So as I'm listening to you and I'm thinking about your life journey, I don't
Mhm.
know all your life journey, but definitely your experience. But if you could go back though and give yourself, your first year principal self, one
Mhm.
piece of advice about moving forward, and especially now with courage and clarity, what would
Mhm.
it be? And does that same wisdom apply to leaders outside of education?
I would have been a lot more collaborative in my leadership. I think I wasted too much time as a lone wolf, and it took me time to trust others because I'm really passionate about what I'm passionate about. But sometimes you have to take time to build capacity. And it's kind of like Collins called that flywheel effect.
Mm-hmm.
That is hard and be, but once you build up that momentum, it's like that Price is Right wheel, and that stored energy gets going, and that flywheel is easy to maintain. I think I spent too much time trying to be a lone wolf and doing it by myself. And
Mm-hmm.
it took a lot of hard lessons to realize we're better together than separately. That's the advice I would have given myself. And I think that applies to, because you can't scale a business up if you're the only person, you're the only employee. Businesses grow as they expand. And that means you got to trust and build systems and build capacity. I would have done that a lot earlier.
Mm-hmm. So, as we come to the close almost of this great conversation, what do you hope your legacy will be, not just in schools, but in the broader conversation about leadership and culture.
Authenticity.
Oh, thank you.
And I hope that being a constant, unapologetic voice for the voiceless and the powerless, um, that I've never sold my principles for money or fame or recognition. I've turned down many, many opportunities that weren't aligned with my core values. I think growing up in Flint, Michigan, who many people know from the water crisis and the deindustrialization and the blight, I came from nothing. So I never feared losing anything because I didn't have anything. So I think a test of people who grow, develop, have some recognition, some success, is that they get defined by that. And I hope my legacy is I've never been defined by that, that I'm as real today as I was as a teacher in 1990 in a seventh grade social studies class.
I want to go back to how you started. You responded, and the first word you said was authenticity.
Mm-hmm.
Listeners, if I could even stress anything, that's what I've learned about my own self is I'm not playing a game anymore. I want to be authentic. And when I heard you say that, it actually brought some tears to my eyes because it's so important. And I appreciate you going back to when you were in Flint, Michigan, growing up and so on, the why. And
Mm-hmm.
that's hopefully the listeners understand that. So on that note, final conversational piece is what is one practical action that listeners, whether they're teachers, principals, or corporate leaders, that they could take tomorrow to begin moving forward in their own organizations towards a healthier culture, a deeper understanding of identity, healing from past wounds, and but also a renewed hope for the future.
Okay. Well, I mentioned Jim Collins a few times. He's one of my favorite authors and organizational thought leaders. In his book, Good to Great, he said, great organizations seek and confront brutal facts without losing hope. So brutal facts represent evidence of areas that are obvious that we need to improve. So all improvement begins with an acknowledgement that something needs to improve. Toxic positivity, or as many would call artificial harmony, is not a way forward. In every 12-step program, the first step is admitting there's a problem. So if I'm trying to help my organization move forward, the first step is to be authentic about where does our attention need to focus. Now, where does the without losing hope come in? Well, we want to learn together. We want to find what have others done to improve attendance? What have others done to improve literacy or numeracy? So it's not just beating people over the head with data that's sobering. It's then carving a pathway forward. What are the steps we need to take to move these brutal facts into more beautiful facts
Mm.
and engage people in that journey? The Harvard Business Review for years publishes in their fourth quarter journal the most compelling motivators in American workplace. And number one for years has been evidence of impact of my work. It's not recognition. It's not a raise. It's not appreciation. Those are nice, but people want to know that their efforts are actually making a difference. And monitoring and measuring and engaging in that journey together, step by step, just brings joy to people because you're going to work hard anyway. I want to know that my hard work is actually translating into real, tangible impact. That's how you keep people engaged. That's how you keep people satisfied as employees. And that's how your system improves.
Again, Dr. Muhammad, I cannot thank you enough. And to the listeners, as you are reflecting on Dr. Muhammad's words, I really encourage you to think about your own role, whether you're an educator, a leader, a colleague, or a community member. So I'm asking you or to think about what small steps can you take to strengthen your culture wherever you are, How can you better understand identity, your own and those around you? And where might you begin the process of healing so that hope can take root? The work of moving forward is never easy, but it is also possible. And Dr. Muhammad definitely talked about many places that this can happen, but it starts with intention, with courage, and with the belief that change is within reach. When, and again, Dr. Muhammad stressed this over and over, when we come together. So thank you for joining me on Moving Forward. If this episode encouraged you, please share it with a colleague or friend. And don't forget to subscribe so you won't miss future conversations. Until next time, keep leading with courage, compassion, and hope. And again, Dr. Muhammad, thank you very much.
Thank you. My pleasure. Thanks for having me.